Madeline Brooks stood trembling in the autumn rain, watching a janitor kneel at the weathered park bench where her son used to sit every day before he died. For 3 months, she had secretly followed this stranger, Xavier Grant, who arrived at dawn with fresh flowers and stayed for exactly 17 minutes. Today, she finally confronted him. "Why do you come here?" she demanded, her voice breaking. Xavier looked up, his eyes filled with a pain that matched her own. "Because your son saved my life," he whispered, pulling out a worn envelope from his jacket. "And I never got to thank him." Madeline's hands shook as she recognized her son's handwriting on the envelope. Inside was a letter that would shatter everything she thought she knew about her son's final days. What secret had her son been keeping? What connection did this janitor have to her family? Stay with us to discover how this emotional story unfolds and reveals a truth that will restore your faith in humanity. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Madeline Brooks stood before the emergency board meeting, her fingers trembling as she gripped the podium. The 12 faces staring back at her represented everything she had built in the past 15 years as CEO of Brooks Technology Solutions. Yet today, she was about to dismantle the one thing that mattered most. Effective immediately, I'm recommending we dissolve the Ethan Brooks Memorial Foundation, she announced, her voice hollow. The foundation has served its purpose, and continuing it only prolongs grief that needs to end. The board members exchanged uncomfortable glances. Her late son's foundation had been providing scholarships and mentorship to underprivileged youth interested in technology for 3 years since his death at age 19. Closing it felt like erasing Ethan's legacy entirely. "Madeline, perhaps we should table this discussion," suggested Thomas Chen, her longtime friend and board member. "You're not thinking clearly." "I'm thinking perfectly clearly," Madeline snapped, her polished composure cracking. "Keeping this foundation open is keeping a wound from healing. Every scholarship recipient, every mentorship program, every annual gala is just a reminder that my son is gone. I can't do this anymore." She had spent 3 years pouring money and energy into the foundation, believing it would give Ethan's death meaning. Instead, it had become a monument to her failure as a mother. She hadn't known her son was struggling, hadn't known about his secret life helping others, hadn't known anything until it was too late. The conference room door suddenly burst open. Xavier Grant, wearing his Navy janitor's uniform from the building's cleaning service, stood in the doorway holding a worn cardboard box. His dark eyes were determined, despite the obvious nervousness in his stance. "I'm sorry to interrupt," he said, his voice steady despite the shocked faces turning toward him. "But I can't let you close that foundation without knowing the truth about your son." Security guards immediately moved toward him, but Madeline held up her hand, something in his words stopping her cold. She had seen this man before, she realized with a jolt. Weeks ago, early one morning when she couldn't sleep, she had driven to Thornhill Park, to the bench where Ethan used to spend hours working on his laptop. This janitor had been there, kneeling before the bench with fresh flowers. "Who are you?" Madeline demanded, her heart pounding. "My name is Xavier Grant," he said, stepping into the room despite the security guards flanking him. 3 years ago, your son saved my life, and I've been trying to figure out how to tell you this since the day he died." The boardroom fell completely silent. Madeline felt the floor shift beneath her feet. "That's impossible. I would have known if Ethan helped someone. I would have known." Xavier set the cardboard box on the conference table. That's exactly what he was afraid of. That you'd find out what he was doing and try to stop him because you'd worry it was too dangerous. He opened the box carefully, revealing stacks of journals, photographs, and letters, all in Ethan's distinctive handwriting. Madeline's breath caught in her throat as she recognized her son's careful script. Ethan didn't just want to change the world through technology, Xavier continued, his voice thick with emotion. He was already doing it, one person at a time, in ways you never knew about. And I'm not the only one he saved. Madeline moved closer to the table, her hands shaking as she reached for one of the journals. She opened it to a random page and saw her son's words. Met XG today at the downtown soup kitchen. Former teacher, lost everything to addiction after his daughter died. He doesn't think he deserves a second chance, but I'm going to prove him wrong. Her vision blurred with tears. You're XG, she whispered. Xavier nodded. Your son found me at my lowest point. I was living on the streets, had given up on everything. He convinced me to enter rehab, paid for the treatment himself, found me this job, and mentored me for a year. He saved my life, Mrs. Brooks. And according to these journals, I wasn't the only one. He pulled out a thick folder from the box. There are 17 people in here. 17 lives your son changed or saved in the 2 years before he died. Each one has a story. Each one wants to testify about what the Ethan Brooks Memorial Foundation means, not just as an abstract charity, but as a continuation of the work he was already doing. Thomas Chen stood up, moving to examine the journals. Madeline, did you know about any of this? She shook her head, unable to speak. How had she not known? How had her brilliant, compassionate son been living this entire secret life of helping others, and she had been completely blind to it? There's one more thing, Xavier said quietly, pulling out a sealed envelope with Mom written on it in Ethan's handwriting. He wrote this letter 6 months before he died. He gave it to me and made me promise that if anything ever happened to him, I would deliver it to you, but only when the time was right. Madeline's hands shook violently as she took the envelope. Why now? Why wait 3 years? Because he knew you'd blame yourself, Xavier said gently. He knew you'd try to make sense of his death by creating a foundation, by doing all the things you thought he would have wanted. He knew you'd eventually burn out and want to shut it all down. And he wanted you to know, when that moment came, that you weren't failing him. You were just finally ready to understand who he really was. The envelope felt impossibly heavy in her hands. Around the boardroom, the board members sat in stunned silence, watching this moment unfold. How did he die? Xavier asked softly. You've never publicly said what happened. Madeline's throat constricted. This was the question she'd avoided for 3 years, the truth she had hidden behind vague statements about a tragic accident. He fell, she whispered, from the roof of our downtown outreach center during a storm. They said he was checking on damage, but I never understood why he was there so late at night. Xavier's expression filled with understanding and pain. He was there because someone called him for help. Someone who needed him in the middle of the night, and he didn't hesitate. That's who your son was. Something broke open in Madeline's chest, 3 years of carefully controlled grief suddenly flooding through the cracks. She had spent so long trying to understand why Ethan had been at that building, why he had taken such a risk during a dangerous storm. Now, standing in this boardroom with a janitor who held the keys to her son's secret life, she finally understood. Ethan had died doing exactly what he loved, exactly who he was. And she had never really known him at all. "I need to read this letter," she said, her voice breaking. "I need to know what he wanted to tell me." But even as she said it, Madeline knew this was only the beginning. This janitor, this Xavier Grant who visited her son's favorite bench every morning with flowers, held more than just a letter. He held the truth about who Ethan really was. And somehow, she sensed that truth was going to change everything. Xavier Grant had learned long ago that rock bottom has a basement, and he had found every level of it. At 42 years old, he should have been enjoying a stable career, maybe watching his own offspring grow up, planning for retirement. Instead, he spent his days mopping floors in a corporate office building and his nights in a small studio apartment in one of Ashland Hills' less desirable neighborhoods, grateful just to have 4 walls and a door that locked. The journey to this modest existence had been brutal. 15 years ago, Xavier had been a respected high school English teacher at Westbridge Academy, one of the city's premier private schools. He had loved his job, loved introducing teenagers to the power of literature and critical thinking. His classroom had been a sanctuary, where struggling students found their voices and confident ones learned humility. His colleagues respected him. His students remembered him years later. Then his daughter, Emma, died. She was only 16, a bright, artistic soul who painted murals and wrote poetry. A drunk driver had run a red light, and in an instant, Xavier's entire world shattered. His marriage couldn't survive the grief. Within a year, his wife had filed for divorce, unable to look at him without seeing the daughter they had lost together. The house that had once been filled with Emma's laughter became unbearably silent. Xavier tried to keep teaching, but the sight of teenagers his daughter's age was too much. Every girl with dark hair reminded him of Emma. Every creative project submitted by a student felt like a knife to his heart. He started missing classes, showing up late, unable to focus. The school administration had been patient at first, understanding even, but there were limits to compassion when students' education was at stake. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. They suggested he take a leave of absence. He took it as a suggestion to disappear entirely. That's when the drinking started. Tentatively at first, just a glass of wine to help him sleep. Then a bottle. Then whatever he could afford. Alcohol made the pain fuzzy, made Emma's absence feel less sharp. It also made everything else disappear, his job, his relationships, his savings account, his self-respect. The descent was faster than he could have imagined. Within 2 years of Emma's death, Xavier was unemployed, divorced, and living in his car. The respected teacher who had once shaped young minds was now the homeless man people crossed the street to avoid. He spent his days at the downtown soup kitchen and his nights wherever he could find shelter, under bridges, in abandoned buildings, anywhere the police wouldn't move him along. He had given up entirely by the time Ethan Brooks found him. It was a cold November evening, and Xavier was sitting on a bench outside the Ashland Hills Public Library, trying to stay warm and wondering if he had the energy to make it through another winter on the streets. He was reading a tattered paperback copy of The Great Gatsby that someone had left on the bench, one of the few possessions he still carried from his teaching days. A young man, maybe 19 or 20, sat down beside him. Most people avoided the homeless, but this kid just settled in like it was the most natural thing in the world to sit next to someone who clearly hadn't showered in weeks. "That's one of my favorite books," the young man said, nodding at the paperback. "The green light symbolism always gets me." Xavier had been so starved for human conversation that he responded without thinking. Most people focus on the green light, But I always thought the eyes of Dr. T.J. Eckelberg were more significant. The eyes that see everything but do nothing, watching the moral decay without intervention. The young man's face lit up. "You're a teacher." "Was," Xavier corrected bitterly. "Long time ago." "I'm Ethan," the young man said, extending his hand without hesitation, without the typical wariness people showed around the homeless. "What's your name?" "Xavier. Though most people around here just call me Crazy X." Ethan shook his head firmly. "I'll call you Xavier, or Mr. Grant if you prefer. A man who quotes Fitzgerald and discusses symbolism deserves to be called by his proper name." That conversation changed everything. Ethan came back the next day, and the day after that. He brought coffee, sandwiches, and most importantly, conversation. He never pitied Xavier, never treated him like a charity case or a project. He just talked to him like a person, asked his opinions about books, about teaching, about life. After 2 weeks, Ethan made his offer. "I know a rehabilitation center in Sterling Valley, about 40 miles from here. It's a good program, intensive but effective. Would you consider going?" Xavier laughed, a harsh sound. "Kid, I appreciate the thought, but those places cost money I don't have. And even if I did, I'm too far gone. I'm not worth saving." Ethan's expression became serious. "The cost is already covered. And you're wrong about the other thing. Everyone is worth saving, Mr. Grant. You just need to remember that you were once someone who helped shape young minds. That person is still in there." Xavier wanted to argue, wanted to explain that the person Ethan thought existed had died with Emma. But something in the young man's unwavering belief made him reconsider. Maybe, just maybe, there was a sliver of hope left. The rehabilitation center was grueling. 90 days of detox, therapy, and confronting every demon Xavier had been drowning with alcohol. Ethan visited every week without fail, sometimes bringing books, sometimes just sitting quietly while Xavier worked through the difficult days. He never asked for gratitude or recognition. He just showed up, consistent and steady. When Xavier completed the program, Ethan was there with next steps already planned. He had secured Xavier a job interview with the building management company that serviced Brooks Technology Solutions. The job was humble, janitorial work, night shifts cleaning corporate offices. But it came with a paycheck, benefits, and dignity. "I know it's not teaching," Ethan had said, "but it's a start. Once you're stable, we can talk about getting your teaching certification reinstated." Xavier had taken the job gratefully. For the first time in years, he had a routine, a purpose, and hope. Ethan continued to mentor him, meeting for coffee every week, helping him find an apartment, connecting him with a support group for recovering addicts. They talked about literature, about life, about Xavier's dreams of someday returning to the classroom. Then, 6 months into Xavier's recovery, Ethan died. The news came on a Tuesday morning. Xavier was at work, mopping the floors of the very building where Ethan's mother was CEO, when he heard employees whispering about the tragedy. The CEO's son, only 19, had fallen from a building during a storm. Gone, just like that. Xavier had collapsed in the hallway, sobbing, his carefully rebuilt world crumbling again. But this time, he didn't reach for a bottle. This time, he held on to everything Ethan had taught him about resilience, about purpose, about being worth saving. He attended Ethan's funeral from the back row, anonymous among hundreds of mourners, and made himself a promise. He would honor Ethan's memory by living the life Ethan had helped him reclaim. He would visit Ethan's favorite bench in Thornhill Park every morning before his shift, bringing flowers and spending 17 minutes there, because that's how long their first conversation had lasted. And someday, when the time was right, he would tell Madeline Brooks the truth about her extraordinary son. That day had finally come. Xavier just hoped he could find the words to explain how a homeless stranger and a wealthy CEO's son had formed a bond that transcended every social barrier, and how that bond had literally saved his life. Ethan Brooks had been gone for 3 years, 2 months, and 14 days. But Madeline could still hear his laugh echoing through the empty rooms of her Oakmont Heights estate. The sprawling house, with its 8 bedrooms and professionally landscaped gardens, had once been filled with the chaos of raising a curious, energetic boy. Now it was a mausoleum, beautiful and lifeless. Madeline stood in Ethan's bedroom, preserved exactly as he had left it the morning he died. His laptop sat closed on the desk, the screensaver frozen in time. His bookshelf overflowed with technical manuals, science fiction novels, and philosophy texts. His sneakers were still by the door, waiting for feet that would never wear them again. She came here when the grief became unbearable, when the weight of continuing without him felt impossible to carry. The room told a story of who she thought her son was. Brilliant, driven, passionate about technology and innovation. His walls were covered with posters of coding languages and inspirational quotes from tech pioneers. His desk held prototypes of apps he had been developing, ideas that could have changed industries. This was the Ethan she had known, the one she had raised to follow in her entrepreneurial footsteps. But Xavier's revelations had shattered that understanding. The journals and letters he had brought to the board meeting told a completely different story. One of a young man who cared less about disrupting markets and more about helping individuals. One who had been living a double life she never suspected. Madeline had spent the past week reading through Ethan's journals, and each entry broke her heart in new ways. He had documented his work with 17 different people, each one struggling with circumstances that had pushed them to society's margins. Xavier was just one story among many. There was Kiana, a talented musician who had aged out of foster care with nowhere to go. Ethan had found her performing for change in the subway and helped her get into a community college music program, paying her tuition anonymously. There was Dylan, a veteran suffering from untreated mental health issues, whom Ethan had connected with proper medical care and housing assistance. There was Lila, a single mother working 3 jobs to support her family, whom Ethan had helped with everything from childcare to job training. The list went on. 17 lives, 17 people Ethan had invested himself in completely, and Madeline hadn't known about any of them. How was that possible? How had she been so blind to her own son's secret life? The answer, she realized with painful clarity, was that she had been too focused on the wrong things. She had been so proud of Ethan's academic achievements, his acceptance to Stanford, his plans to start his own tech company. She had encouraged those ambitions, celebrated those successes, and completely missed the work that actually mattered to him. In one journal entry, dated 8 months before his death, Ethan had written, "Mom asked today about my plans for the company I want to start. I told her about the app development ideas, and she was so excited, already talking about venture capital and market research. I didn't have the heart to tell her that I don't want to build apps to make money. I want to build systems that connect people who need help with people who can provide it. I want to create something that matters, not something that profits." But she wouldn't understand. She'd worry that I'm wasting my potential. Those words haunted Madeline. Ethan had been right. She wouldn't have understood. She would have worried, would have tried to redirect him toward more practical pursuits. She had built a technology empire through relentless focus and strategic thinking. The idea of her son giving away his time and money to help strangers would have seemed inefficient, unsustainable, even naive. She had loved him fiercely, but she had never really seen him. The financial cost of Ethan's death paled in comparison to the emotional toll. Madeline had thrown herself into building the memorial foundation, believing it would give his death meaning. She had endowed it with $5 million, hired a full-time staff, and personally oversaw every scholarship and program. But it had all been based on her vision of who Ethan should have been, not who he actually was. The foundation focused on academic merit, on identifying promising students interested in technology careers. It was prestigious, selective, and completely missed the point of Ethan's actual work. He hadn't helped people because they showed promise or potential. He had helped them because they needed help, period. No applications, no selection criteria, no strings attached. Standing in his bedroom now, holding the letter he had written for her 3 years ago, Madeline finally understood why she had been ready to close the foundation. It wasn't just grief exhaustion. It was the unconscious recognition that everything she had built in Ethan's name was wrong. A monument to the son she had wanted him to be, rather than the son he actually was. With shaking hands, she broke the seal on the envelope and pulled out several handwritten pages. Ethan's familiar handwriting blurred through her tears as she began to read. "Dear Mom, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and Xavier has decided you're ready to hear the truth. I'm sorry for keeping secrets from you. I know it wasn't fair, but I also know you would have tried to stop me if you knew what I was doing. Not because you didn't care, but because you cared too much and would have worried about my safety. I need you to understand something important. The life you built for me, the opportunities you provided, the values you instilled about hard work and excellence, none of that was wasted. I am who I am because of you. But I'm also who I am despite you, if that makes sense. You taught me that success means building something lasting and valuable. I just defined valuable differently than you expected. Every person I helped, from Xavier to Kiana to all the others, they weren't charity cases to me. They were human beings who deserved a second chance, who deserved to be seen and valued. I saw myself in each of them because I realized how random luck really is. I was born into privilege, into a family with resources and connections. They weren't. That's not virtue on my part or failure on theirs. That's just circumstance. Here's what I need you to know. I was happy. Genuinely, deeply happy in ways I never was when I was just focusing on grades and college applications and impressing people. The work I did with Xavier and the others gave my life meaning. If I died doing this work, then I died doing what I loved. Please don't let that become another reason to blame yourself. I know you, Mom. I know you'll create some kind of foundation or memorial in my name. And I know it will be perfectly organized, impeccably run, and completely focused on measurable outcomes and strategic impact. That's who you are, and I love that about you. But I'm asking you to consider doing something different. Don't help people because they deserve it, or because they show promise. Help them because they need help. That's it. That's the whole criteria. The 17 people whose stories Xavier will share with you, they're not special cases. They're just the ones I managed to help before I ran out of time. There are thousands more like them in this city alone. If you want to honor my memory, help them. Not with applications and selection committees, but with direct action and genuine care. I love you, Mom. I know we didn't always understand each other, but I never doubted your love for me. Now I'm asking you to love other people the way you loved me, fiercely and without reservation. That's the legacy I want. Not buildings with my name on them, but lives changed because someone cared enough to help. Xavier is a good man. Trust him. Let him show you the work I was doing. And please, please don't shut yourself away in grief. The world needs people like you, people who get things done. Just maybe aim that power at different targets than you originally planned. I'll be proud of you no matter what. Your son, Ethan. Madeline collapsed onto Ethan's bed, clutching the letter to her chest, and finally allowed herself to truly grieve. Not for the son she had imagined, but for the extraordinary young man she had never fully known. A young man who had died at 19 trying to help someone in need during a dangerous storm, because that's exactly who he was. The foundation she had built was wrong, but Xavier had given her a chance to make it right, to transform it into something Ethan would have actually wanted, if she was brave enough to listen. Madeline Brooks had built her empire from almost nothing, and that achievement defined her more than any other aspect of her identity. At 51, she was worth over $200 million, controlled a technology company with 3,000 employees across 12 states, and had her name on buildings at 2 universities. Forbes had featured her in their Power Women issue 3 times. Harvard Business School used her company as a case study in successful pivots and market disruption. But none of those accomplishments meant anything anymore. Not since Ethan died. She had grown up in a working-class neighborhood in Belmont Shore, the daughter of a factory worker and a grocery store cashier. Her parents had worked multiple jobs to keep food on the table and clothes on her back. There had been no college fund, no connections, no safety net. Just the fierce insistence from her mother that education was the only way out of generational poverty. Madeline had taken that message to heart. She had worked her way through community college, then transferred to a state university, taking classes during the day and working nights as a data entry clerk. She had graduated with a degree in computer science just as the tech industry was beginning to explode, and she had the timing and the tenacity to capitalize on that moment. Her first company had been a software consulting firm run out of her studio apartment. She had landed a few small contracts, built a reputation for reliability and innovation, and gradually expanded. By 30, she had 50 employees. By 35, she had sold that company for $20 million and immediately started Brooks Technology Solutions, focusing on enterprise resource planning software for mid-sized companies. The second company had been the real success story. She had identified a gap in the market, developed proprietary solutions, and aggressively pursued contracts. Within a decade, Brooks Technology Solutions had become an industry leader, known for cutting-edge software and exceptional client service. Madeline had personally overseen every major decision, working 80-hour weeks, sleeping in her office during critical product launches, sacrificing everything for growth. Including, she now realized, her relationship with her son. Ethan's father, Marcus, had been a brief marriage of convenience more than passion. They had met during her first company's expansion phase, both ambitious young professionals who mistook mutual respect for love. The marriage had lasted 5 years, long enough to have Ethan, before Marcus admitted he wanted a wife who was home more than she was at the office. The divorce had been amicable, with Marcus taking a generous settlement and minimal custody. He had moved to Seattle, remarried, and saw Ethan only during school breaks. Madeline had told herself she was giving Ethan everything she never had. Private schools, tutors, summer enrichment programs, every possible advantage. She had hired excellent nannies when he was young, enrolled him in the best schools, attended every parent-teacher conference, even if it meant rescheduling board meetings. She had been present in all the ways that could be scheduled and managed. What she hadn't given him was spontaneity, unstructured time, or the freedom to fail without it reflecting on the family's image. Every activity had been chosen for how it would look on college applications. Every achievement had been celebrated as a step toward future success. She had loved him desperately, but had shown that love through opportunity rather than presence. The irony wasn't lost on her now. She had worked so hard to give Ethan a different life than her own struggling childhood. Yet in doing so, she had deprived him of the very thing that had made her successful. The hunger that comes from having to fight for everything. Ethan had never wanted for anything material, but he had apparently wanted for purpose, for meaning beyond achievement. Her penthouse office on the 42nd floor of the Ashland Financial Tower overlooked the entire city. Floor-to-ceiling windows provided a panoramic view of the urban landscape she had conquered through sheer determination. The office itself was a monument to success. Original artwork, designer furniture, awards and accolades displayed on custom shelving. Everything carefully curated to project power and accomplishment. But sitting at her desk now, reading through Ethan's journals for the 100th time, Madeline saw her office differently. It wasn't a symbol of achievement. It was a fortress she had built to keep the world at a distance, to avoid the vulnerability that came with real human connection. Even her philanthropy had been strategic, calculated for maximum impact and public relations benefit. Ethan's foundation work, by contrast, had been completely unstructured. He had helped people based on need and opportunity, with no thought to efficiency or scalability or return on investment. It was everything her business instincts had taught her to avoid. Yet it had clearly given him more satisfaction than anything else in his short life. The day after Xavier's revelation in the boardroom, Madeline had done something she rarely allowed herself. She had canceled all her meetings and spent the entire day reading through every journal entry, every letter, every photograph in the box Xavier had brought. The picture that emerged was of a young man she barely recognized as her son. There was Ethan at the downtown soup kitchen, serving meals and listening to stories from people experiencing homelessness. There was Ethan at a community center, teaching basic computer skills to senior citizens. There was Ethan at a youth shelter, mentoring teenagers who had aged out of foster care. In every photograph, his smile was genuine, his engagement complete. He looked happy in ways she had never seen during their carefully planned family dinners or strategic college planning sessions. One journal entry, dated a year before his death, had particularly gutted her. Spent 4 hours today just listening to Mrs. Chen talk about her late husband. She's been alone since he died 5 years ago, and I think I'm the first person who's really listened to her in months. Mom would say I wasted an afternoon, that I should have been studying or working on my apps. But Mrs. Chen cried when I left and made me promise to come back. How is that wasted time? How is making someone feel less alone not the most important thing I could possibly do with my afternoon? Madeline had wept reading that entry, realizing how completely she had misunderstood what mattered to her son. She had raised him to value productivity and achievement, and he had quietly rejected those values in favor of something more fundamental: human connection and compassion. Her own emotional landscape had been barren for years. After the divorce from Marcus, she had dated occasionally, but never seriously. Work had been her primary relationship, providing structure and purpose. She had friends, mostly professional acquaintances and board members, but no one she truly confided in. Her parents had passed away before Ethan turned 10, and she had no siblings. Ethan had been her only real family, and she had treated that relationship like another item on her task list. Quality time scheduled between board meetings, conversations focused on achievement and goals rather than feelings and dreams. She had thought she was being a good mother by providing opportunities and maintaining high standards. Now she understood she had been a CEO even at home, managing rather than connecting. The night after reading all of Ethan's journals, Madeline had driven to Thornhill Park at dawn, the time Xavier said he visited every morning. She had parked across the street and watched as the janitor arrived precisely at 6, carrying fresh flowers. He had knelt before the bench where Ethan used to work on his laptop, placed the flowers carefully, and then simply sat for exactly 17 minutes, his head bowed. Something about the ritual had broken through Madeline's carefully maintained composure. This man, this former homeless addict, whom her son had saved, showed more devotion to Ethan's memory than she had allowed herself. She had been so focused on managing her grief efficiently, on channeling it into the foundation and her work, that she had never simply allowed herself to feel it. After Xavier left that morning, Madeline had approached the bench herself. Fresh flowers lay against the weathered wood, small tokens of remembrance that spoke of consistency and care. She had sat where Ethan used to sit, trying to see the world through his eyes, trying to understand what he had found here that their mansion in Oakmont Heights couldn't provide. The answer, she realized, was freedom. Freedom from expectations, from the weight of being Madeline Brooks' son, from the pressure to achieve and impress. At this bench, he could just be Ethan, a young man trying to make the world slightly better one person at a time. Over the following weeks, Madeline had made a decision that surprised even herself. She began showing up at the same places Ethan had frequented, trying to retrace his steps and understand his work. She volunteered at the downtown soup kitchen where he had met Xavier. She visited the community center where he had taught computer classes. She spoke with the people who had known him, not as Madeline Brooks' son, but simply as Ethan. What she discovered shattered her remaining illusions. These people hadn't known Ethan was wealthy. He had never mentioned his mother's company or their family's resources. He had simply shown up consistently, offered help without judgment, and treated everyone with genuine respect and interest. He had been, by all accounts, an extraordinary young man, who happened to have been raised by a mother too focused on success to notice his extraordinary qualities. The guilt was crushing. Madeline had built an empire, but failed at the one thing that truly mattered: knowing and supporting her son for who he actually was, rather than who she wanted him to be. She couldn't change the past, couldn't reclaim the conversations they should have had, or the support she should have offered for his real passions. But Xavier had given her something precious, a roadmap to understanding Ethan's true legacy. And perhaps, if she was brave enough to follow it, a chance to transform her own empty success into something that actually mattered. The question was whether Madeline Brooks, CEO and self-made millionaire, could set aside her ego and control long enough to learn from a janitor who understood her son better than she ever had. That vulnerability terrified her more than any business challenge ever could. The second meeting between Madeline and Xavier happened 3 days after the boardroom confrontation, but this time it was on her terms. She had her assistant arrange for Xavier to come to her office during his lunch break, offering to compensate him for his time. She wanted to discuss the foundation's future, to understand more about Ethan's work, to somehow make sense of the revelation that had upended everything she thought she knew about her son. Xavier arrived at her office looking uncomfortable in his janitor's uniform, clearly aware he didn't belong in the executive suite's polished luxury. Madeline's assistant, Juliana, had offered him coffee and a seat in the waiting area, but he had declined both, standing by the window with his hands in his pockets, studying the city sprawl below. When Madeline's office door opened, Xavier turned with an expression that was difficult to read. Not quite defensive, but wary, as if expecting judgment or dismissal. "Thank you for coming," Madeline said, keeping her tone professional but not cold. "Please, sit down. Would you like something to drink?" "I'm fine, thank you," Xavier replied, taking one of the leather chairs across from her desk, but perching on the edge like he might need to leave quickly. An awkward silence stretched between them. Madeline, who commanded boardrooms with ease and negotiated multi-million-dollar contracts without hesitation, found herself uncertain how to begin this conversation. This man had known her son in ways she hadn't. He possessed insights and memories she desperately wanted to access, yet she had no framework for how to ask. "I read all of Ethan's journals," she finally said. "Every single entry. It took me 3 days." Xavier nodded slowly. "Then you know he was special? Different from most people his age." "I always knew he was special," Madeline said, hearing the defensive edge in her voice and trying to soften it. "I just didn't know why. I thought it was because he was brilliant, because he had so much potential to achieve great things in technology or business. I didn't realize his greatness was in how he treated people." "He learned that from somewhere," Xavier said quietly. "Kids don't develop that kind of compassion in a vacuum." Madeline shook her head. "I don't deserve that kindness, Mr. Grant. Ethan's compassion came despite my parenting, not because of it. Raised him to value achievement and success. He rejected those values and chose something better." Xavier leaned back slightly in his chair, seeming to assess her with those careful eyes that had seen the worst of human existence and survived. "Mrs. Brooks, can I be honest with you? Please." "Ethan talked about you all the time, about how hard you worked, how you built something from nothing, how you never gave up even when things were difficult. He admired you enormously. He just wished you would see that the same determination you put into building your company could be applied to helping individual people." The words hit Madeline like a physical blow. "He said that?" "Not in those exact words. But yeah, that was the essence of it. He wasn't rejecting your values. He was trying to expand them. He wanted you to see that success could mean more than quarterly earnings and market share." Madeline stood abruptly, moving to the window where Xavier had been standing moments before. The city stretched out below, all of it familiar territory she had conquered through strategic thinking and relentless execution. "I don't know how to do what he did," she admitted. "I don't know how to help people one-on-one without it becoming a project to manage or a problem to solve efficiently." "Maybe that's exactly what you need to learn," Xavier said. And there was no judgment in his voice, just simple observation. "Ethan's work wasn't efficient. It was effective. There's a difference." She turned to face him. "Teach me." Xavier looked surprised. "What?" "Teach me how to do what Ethan did. Show me the people he helped. Let me understand his approach. I want to transform the foundation into something that actually honors his real legacy. But I can't do that from this office, managing it like another business initiative. I need to understand the work from the inside." "Mrs. Brooks, I'm not qualified to teach anyone anything. I'm barely keeping my own life together." "You're exactly qualified," Madeline countered. "You knew my son. You understood his work. And you experienced it yourself. So you know what actually helps versus what just looks good on paper. I'm asking you to help me understand." Xavier studied her for a long moment, and Madeline forced herself not to fill the silence with more arguments or explanations. This was his decision, and she had to respect that, even though waiting for his answer felt unbearable. "Okay," he finally said, "but on one condition." "Name it." "You can't approach this like a CEO studying a new market. You have to be willing to actually be present with people, to listen without trying to fix everything immediately, to accept that sometimes help looks like just sitting with someone while they're struggling. Can you do that? Madeline's instinct was to say yes immediately, to assure him she could absolutely do whatever was required. But something made her pause and actually consider the question honestly. Could she sit discomfort without rushing to solve it? Could she be present with people's pain without immediately strategizing how to eliminate it? Could she value connection over results? I don't know, she admitted. But I want to try. I need to try for Ethan. Xavier stood, and for the first time since entering her office, he smiled slightly. That's a more honest answer than I expected. Okay, Mrs. Brooks, we'll start tomorrow. Meet me at Thornhill Park at 6 in the morning. Wear comfortable clothes, nothing fancy. And don't bring your assistant or security or any of the normal entourage, just you. What will we be doing? You'll see. Just trust me, the way Ethan did. After Xavier left, Madeline stood at her window for another hour, watching the city move through its daily rhythms. Somewhere down there were the 17 people Ethan had helped, plus countless others he never got the chance to reach. Tomorrow, she would begin trying to see the world the way her son had, through eyes that valued individual human dignity over aggregate impact. The prospect terrified her, but for the first time since Ethan's death, she felt something besides hollow grief. She felt purpose. Madeline arrived at Thornhill Park at 5:55 the next morning, wearing jeans and a simple sweater instead of her usual designer suits. She had left her Mercedes at home and driven her seldom-used Range Rover, not wanting to arrive in something too ostentatious. Even these small adjustments felt foreign, like she was playing dress-up as someone she wasn't. Xavier was already there, kneeling at Ethan's bench with fresh flowers as he did every morning. Madeline hung back, not wanting to interrupt the ritual. She watched as he placed the flowers carefully, sat in silence for several minutes, then stood and turned to find her watching. "You're early," he said, but there was approval in his tone. "I didn't want to be late for my first day of education," Madeline replied, attempting lightness despite her nervousness. Xavier gestured for her to approach the bench. Up close, Madeline could see that it had been carved with initials over the years, declarations of love and friendship worn smooth by weather and time. A small brass plaque had been added recently, she realized. It simply read, "Ethan Brooks believed in second chances." "I had that installed 2 months after he died," Xavier explained. "Used the first paycheck I earned after getting sober. Seemed right that there should be something permanent marking this spot where he spent so much time." Madeline traced the letters with her finger, feeling tears threaten again. "Thank you for that, for remembering him this way." "I remember him every day," Xavier said simply. "Now come on, we have our first stop." They walked through the awakening city as dawn light painted the buildings gold and pink. Xavier led them to a neighborhood Madeline rarely visited, where residential buildings gave way to commercial districts and social services. They stopped at a building with a simple sign, "Bellevue Community Kitchen." "Ethan volunteered here every Tuesday and Thursday morning," Xavier explained. "He'd arrive at 6:30 and help prepare breakfast service until 9, then head to his classes. He never missed a day unless Lily was sick." "Who's Lily?" Madeline asked. Xavier smiled. "You'll meet her. She's one of the 17. Works here now as a coordinator after Ethan helped her get clean and find stable housing." Inside, the kitchen was already bustling with activity. Several volunteers were chopping vegetables, setting up serving stations, and brewing enormous pots of coffee. A woman in her early 30s with auburn hair pulled back in a practical ponytail looked up as they entered, and her face lit up when she saw Xavier. "X, you brought someone new?" Then she really looked at Madeline, and recognition dawned. "Oh my God, you're Ethan's mom." Madeline nodded, unsure how to respond. The woman, Lily, came around the counter and without hesitation pulled Madeline into a hug. "I'm so sorry for your loss. Ethan was incredible. He literally saved my life." The unexpected embrace caught Madeline off guard, but she returned it awkwardly. When Lily pulled back, her eyes were wet. "I've wanted to reach out to you so many times, to tell you about what your son did for me. But Xavier said you weren't ready yet." "I'm ready now," Madeline said, surprised to find she meant it. "Tell me about Ethan. Tell me everything." Over the next hour, as Madeline found herself peeling potatoes and setting up serving stations under Lily's direction, she heard the story. Lily had been addicted to opioids after a prescription for chronic pain had spiraled out of control. She had lost her job, her apartment, and nearly her life before Ethan had found her sleeping in a doorway near this very kitchen. "He didn't lecture me or judge me," Lily explained as they worked side by side. "He just asked if I was hungry and invited me in for breakfast. Then he came back the next day and the day after that. Eventually, he asked if I wanted help getting clean, and when I said yes, he connected me with resources and checked in constantly. He believed I could recover even when I didn't believe it myself." Madeline listened, her hands busy with simple tasks, while her mind struggled to reconcile this story with her image of her son. "How long ago was this?" 2 years before he died. I've been clean for 5 years now. I work here full-time, coordinating services for people experiencing homelessness and addiction. It's because of Ethan that I'm alive and functional. He gave me a second chance when nobody else would." When breakfast service began, Madeline found herself face to face with the people Ethan had cared so much about. Men and women experiencing homelessness. Some struggling with mental health issues. Some simply down on their luck. She served food and coffee, trying to make eye contact and offered genuine smiles the way she watched Xavier and Lily do naturally. An older man with weathered skin and kind eyes approached her station. "You're new here," he observed. "First time volunteering?" "Yes," Madeline admitted. "I'm trying to understand why this work mattered so much to my son." The man studied her with surprising perceptiveness. "Your son the one who helped X? The rich kid everyone talked about?" "Ethan, yes." The man nodded slowly. "Never met him myself, but I heard the stories. People said he was different from most volunteers. Most folks who come here are trying to feel good about themselves, you know, doing their charity work so they can go home feeling like saints. But your boy actually cared, made people feel human. That's rare." After the breakfast service ended, Xavier suggested coffee at a nearby diner. Madeline agreed, still processing everything she had witnessed. They sat in a worn booth with cracked vinyl seats, and Madeline ordered black coffee even though she usually preferred elaborate lattes from expensive cafes. "How are you doing?" Xavier asked once they were settled. "Overwhelmed," Madeline admitted. "That man who talked to me, he said most volunteers are there to feel good about themselves. I think he was right. I've done charity work my entire career, serving on boards, writing checks, attending galas. But I've never actually served food to someone experiencing homelessness before today. I've never had a direct conversation with the people supposedly benefiting from my philanthropy. That doesn't make you a bad person," Xavier said gently. "It just means you were approaching charity from the only framework you knew. Efficient, scalable, strategic. Ethan approached it differently because he valued individual connection over aggregate impact. Can I learn to do that?" Madeline asked. Can I learn to see people the way he did? Or am I too old and too set in my ways? Xavier smiled. The fact that you're asking that question means you can learn. But it won't be comfortable. You're going to have to sit with other people's pain without being able to fix it immediately. You're going to have to accept that sometimes the best help is just listening. Can you do that? Madeline thought about her usual approach to problems. Identify, strategize, execute, measure results. What Xavier was describing was completely antithetical to that methodology. But she had seen the impact of Ethan's approach in Lily's grateful eyes, in Xavier's continued sobriety, in the 17 lives documented in those journals. I don't know if I can, she said honestly, but I want to try. Over the following weeks, Xavier became Madeline's guide into a world she had never truly known, despite her philanthropic efforts. They visited the community center where Ethan had taught computer classes to senior citizens, and Madeline sat through a session trying to help an 80-year-old woman understand email, while Xavier demonstrated infinite patience with every question. They went to the youth shelter where Ethan had mentored teenagers aging out of foster care, and Madeline listened as young people shared stories of neglect and abandonment that made her own privileged childhood feel impossibly distant. They met with Dylan, the veteran Ethan had helped connect with mental health services, who was now thriving in a job training program. Each visit challenged Madeline's instincts. When she met Kiana, the musician Ethan had helped get into community college, her immediate thought was to expand the program, to create a systematic approach for identifying and supporting talented young people facing barriers. Xavier gently redirected her. It's not about scaling the solution, he explained. It's about seeing Kiana as a unique individual with specific needs and dreams. When Ethan helped her, he didn't think about how to help 100 other musicians. He thought about what Kiana needed right now. The lesson was difficult for Madeline, whose entire career had been built on scalability and systems thinking. But gradually, through exposure and Xavier's patient guidance, she began to understand the difference between efficient philanthropy and effective compassion. One rainy afternoon, several weeks into her education, Madeline and Xavier were sitting at Ethan's bench after volunteer work at the community kitchen. Rain pattered on the trees above them, but the bench itself remained relatively dry under the canopy of leaves. Can I tell you something? Xavier asked. Of course. When Ethan first started helping me, I resented him a little bit. This rich kid swooping in to save the homeless man, like I was some kind of project for him. I thought he'd get bored and disappear once he realized I was harder to fix than he expected. But he didn't disappear. No. And eventually I realized that he didn't see me as a project at all. He saw me as Xavier, as someone with value and potential who just needed support. That's why his help actually worked when so many other interventions had failed. He treated me like a person, not a problem. Madeline was quiet for a long moment. I treated Ethan like a problem sometimes, she finally said. Or maybe more like a project. I had a vision for who he should become, and I tried to manage him toward that vision. I never asked him who he actually wanted to be. He knew you loved him, Xavier said. That came through in every journal entry. He just wished you could see him more clearly. I see him now, Madeline whispered. Finally. Too late, but I see him. Xavier reached over and squeezed her hand, a gesture of comfort that would have been unthinkable a month ago. It's not too late to honor who he was. The foundation, the work you're doing now, learning to see people the way he did, that's not too late. That's exactly what he would have wanted. As they sat together in comfortable silence, Madeline realized something had shifted between them. Xavier was no longer just the janitor who had known her son. He had become a friend, perhaps the first genuine friend she had made in decades. Someone who saw past her success and status to the grieving mother underneath, and who cared enough to guide her toward becoming someone Ethan would have been proud of. The rain intensified, and they finally stood to leave, both soaked but neither particularly bothered by it. As they walked back toward where Madeline had parked, she found herself thinking that Ethan had been right about so many things. The connection between people mattered more than achievement. Presence mattered more than productivity. And sometimes the most important work couldn't be measured or scaled or optimized. It could only be lived, one person and one moment at a time. The rupture came 6 weeks into Madeline's transformation, on an otherwise ordinary Tuesday afternoon. She had been reviewing Foundation financial records in preparation for the quarterly board meeting when she noticed an unusual pattern of payments. Small amounts, never more than a few $1,000s, but consistent and always to the same recipient, Xavier Grant. Her stomach clenched as she pulled up the detailed transaction history. 23 separate payments over the past 3 years, totaling nearly $70,000. The descriptions were vague. Participant support, program assistance, research consultation. But they all dated back to before Xavier had revealed himself in that boardroom, before she had known anything about his connection to Ethan. Madeline felt something cold settle in her chest. She called her assistant, asking for copies of all documentation related to these payments. What arrived an hour later confirmed her worst suspicions. The payments had been authorized through a discretionary fund that Ethan had controlled before his death, then continued posthumously through automated transfers Xavier himself had set up with Foundation staff. She had been played. All of it. The emotional revelation in the boardroom, the patient guidance through Ethan's world, the friendship she thought had been forming. It was all built on a foundation of financial dependency Xavier had carefully constructed and hidden from her. Madeline didn't call Xavier to her office this time. She went to find him herself, fury propelling her through the building's corridors until she found him on the 35th floor, emptying trash bins with methodical efficiency. "How much?" she demanded without preamble. Xavier looked up, startled. "Mrs. Brooks, I'm working right now. Can this wait until—" "How much did my son pay you? How much have you taken from the Foundation while pretending to be his grateful friend?" Her voice echoed in the empty hallway. Understanding dawned on Xavier's face, followed by something that looked like resignation. "You found the payments." "Yes, I found the payments. $70,000 over 3 years. Were you ever going to tell me, or was this whole mentorship charade just about keeping your income stream flowing?" "It wasn't like that," Xavier said, his voice quiet but firm. "Ethan set up those payments as part of my recovery support. Housing assistance, continued therapy, education expenses for the teaching certification I'm working toward. He wanted to make sure I had stability. And you just kept taking the money after he died. Kept it secret while pretending to teach me about his legacy of compassion." Madeline's laugh was bitter. "You're good, I'll give you that. You even had me believing we were becoming friends." Xavier's jaw tightened. "We are friends. And I never hid anything. Those payments were part of the Foundation's documented programs. I didn't bring them up because they weren't relevant to what I was trying to show you about Ethan's work." "Not relevant? You've been financially dependent on my family for years, and you don't think that's relevant to our relationship?" "My recovery isn't about money," Xavier said, his voice rising now. "Yes, Ethan helped me financially because that's what I needed at the time. But what saved me wasn't the payments. It was the fact that someone believed I was worth saving. Something you still don't seem to understand, despite everything I've shown you. Don't you dare lecture me about understanding, Madeline shot back. You're just another person who saw an opportunity in my son's compassion. How many others are there? How many of your 17 success stories are still on the foundation payroll, collecting checks while pretending to be grateful? The moment the words left her mouth, Madeline saw Xavier's expression close down completely. The warmth and openness that had gradually emerged over their weeks together vanished, replaced by the wary distance of someone who had learned not to expect understanding from people like her. You know what? You're right, Xavier said flatly. I'm just a janitor and a former addict. Everything I've told you about Ethan was probably lies to keep the money coming. The journals were fake, the letters were forged, and all those people whose lives he touched were just elaborate cons. That makes much more sense than accepting that your son was genuinely good, and I genuinely cared about him. Xavier, no, we're done here. You want to shut down the foundation? Go ahead. You want to stop the payments? Stop them. I've been clean for 3 years now, and I have a job. I'll figure it out, just like I figured everything else out before your son found me. He turned back to his work, dismissing her. Please leave. I have floors to clean. Madeline stood frozen, watching Xavier methodically empty trash bins as if she weren't there. As if the past 6 weeks hadn't happened. She wanted to take back her words, to explain that she was scared of being manipulated again, scared of trusting someone who might have ulterior motives. But her pride wouldn't let her. Instead, she turned and walked away, telling herself she had been right to confront him, right to protect herself from being used. The hollow feeling in her chest suggested otherwise. But Madeline had spent decades ignoring uncomfortable emotions in favor of logical decisions. This, she told herself, was just another necessary choice. The fallout from her confrontation with Xavier came swiftly. Within a week, 3 members of the Foundation's board had resigned, citing concerns about the organization's direction. Thomas Chen, her oldest ally, requested an emergency meeting that Madeline knew wouldn't be pleasant. What she didn't expect was the lawsuit. Harrison Caldwell, a prominent attorney and Foundation board member, filed a legal challenge claiming Madeline was mismanaging the Foundation's assets and deviating from its original mission. The petition, filed in probate court, argued that the Foundation should be placed under independent oversight to ensure Ethan's legacy was properly honored. He's using the payments to Xavier as evidence, Thomas explained when they met in her office. Claims you've been manipulated by a con artist into redirecting Foundation resources away from legitimate scholarships toward unvetted individuals with substance abuse histories. Madeline felt sick. Xavier isn't a con artist. Maybe not, but the optics are terrible. A grieving mother, a charming recovered addict with financial ties to her dead son, unexplained payments, radical changes to Foundation programs. Caldwell is painting a picture of exploitation and mismanagement. So, what do I do? Thomas sighed. You could fight it, but that means exposing everything to public scrutiny. The media would have a field day. Or you could step back, let an independent board take over, and hope they honor some version of what you are trying to build. Those are my only options. Fight and destroy Ethan's reputation, or surrender and watch everything get dismantled. Unless you have evidence that what you were doing was actually Ethan's vision. Real evidence, not just journals that could be dismissed as teenage idealism. Madeline spent that night rereading Ethan's letter, searching for something she could use in court. But the letter was personal emotional. Not the kind of legal documentation that would satisfy a judge. She needed something more concrete, some proof that the Foundation's new direction truly honored Ethan's intentions. She also needed Xavier. He knew the people Ethan had helped, understood the work in ways she was still learning. But after their confrontation, he had made it clear he wanted nothing more to do with her or the Foundation. She had tried calling twice. Both times he hadn't answered. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks away. Madeline hired the best attorneys money could buy, but even they admitted the case was challenging. Without clear documentation of Ethan's wishes beyond the original Foundation charter, and with the financial irregularities Caldwell had highlighted, the court might indeed decide that independent oversight was necessary. The stress manifested in ways Madeline hadn't experienced in years. She couldn't sleep, couldn't focus on work, couldn't stop replaying her confrontation with Xavier and wondering if she had destroyed the one genuine connection she had formed since Ethan's death. 2 weeks before the hearing, Lily from the community kitchen showed up at Madeline's office unannounced. Juliana tried to turn her away, but Madeline, hearing the commotion, came out herself. "I need to talk to you," Lily said firmly, "about Xavier and about what you're throwing away." They sat in Madeline's office, and Lily didn't mince words. "Xavier told me what happened, how you accused him of using Ethan for money. You know what he did after that conversation? He called the Foundation and requested that all payments be stopped immediately. Then he picked up extra shifts at 2 other buildings to make up the income. He's working 70 hours a week now because he'd rather destroy himself than let you think he was using your son." Guilt crashed over Madeline. "I didn't know." "Because you didn't ask. You made assumptions based on fear and distrust, exactly the opposite of everything Ethan tried to teach you." Lily leaned forward. "Here's what you need to understand. Every single one of the 17 people Ethan helped would testify for you. We would stand up in court and explain exactly what your son's real legacy was. But not if you've rejected the one person who knew him best and who's been trying to help you understand. Xavier won't even take my calls. Then don't call. Show up. Do the work. Prove you actually learned something from these past weeks." Lily stood to leave, then paused. Ethan believed people deserved second chances. Maybe you should consider giving Xavier one, and yourself one too. After Lily left, Madeline sat in her office as evening light faded over the city. She had a choice to make, the same choice she always made between pride and vulnerability, between control and trust. This time, though, the stakes were higher than any business decision she had ever faced. This time, she was choosing whether to honor her son's real legacy or lose it forever. The courtroom was smaller than Madeline expected, more intimate and somehow more intimidating than the boardrooms where she usually fought her battles. Harrison Caldwell sat with his legal team, looking confident and prepared. Thomas Chen sat beside Madeline, offering moral support even though he had advised her this fight might be unwinnable. What Caldwell's team didn't expect was the crowd. 17 people filed into the courtroom's public gallery, and Madeline recognized every face from Ethan's journals. Lily was there, along with Dylan the veteran, Kiana the musician, and all the others whose lives Ethan had touched. And standing with them, looking uncertain but determined, was Xavier. Madeline's breath caught. She hadn't seen him in 2 weeks, hadn't known if he would come, despite Lily's assurances. Their eyes met across the courtroom, and something passed between them, not forgiveness exactly, but possibility. Caldwell presented his case first, methodically outlining the Foundation's deviation from its original charter, the questionable payments to Xavier, and Madeline's radical restructuring of programs without proper board oversight. His arguments were logical, well-documented, and damning. Then Madeline's attorney called Xavier to the stand. "Mr. Grant, how did you meet Ethan Brooks?" her attorney began. Xavier described that first evening at the library, his homelessness and addiction, Ethan's persistent kindness. He explained the rehabilitation, the job assistance, the mentorship that continued until Ethan's death. Then he pulled out a folder of documents. "These are receipts and records I kept of every dollar Ethan spent helping me," Xavier said. "Not because he asked me to, but because I needed to remember that someone had invested in me when I couldn't invest in myself." The foundation payments Mrs. Brooks discovered? They were always documented. They were never hidden. They were exactly what Ethan intended. Then, one by one, the other 16 people testified. Each told their story of how Ethan had found them at their lowest point and offered help without judgment. Each explained how the Foundation's original focus on academic merit and traditional success would have excluded them entirely. But Ethan's actual work had been about helping people who fell outside conventional support systems. Kiana, the musician, was particularly compelling. "Ethan didn't help me because I was talented or deserving. He helped me because I needed help. If Mrs. Brooks wants to honor her son's real legacy, she needs to run the Foundation the way he would have, not the way she thinks looks best on paper." The judge listened carefully to every testimony, asking occasional questions, but mostly absorbing the collective picture these 17 people painted of Ethan Brooks. Not as the promising young tech entrepreneur his Foundation's charter described, but as a compassionate young man committed to helping individuals in crisis. Finally, Madeline herself took the stand. Her attorney asked the question they had prepared. "Mrs. Brooks, why did you want to change the Foundation's direction?" Madeline looked directly at Xavier as she answered. "Because I finally understood that I never really knew my son. I was so focused on who I wanted him to be that I missed who he actually was. The Foundation I created was based on my vision of success, not his. Changing it isn't mismanagement. It's correction. It's finally honoring the person Ethan truly was instead of the person I wished he had been." Her voice broke on the last words, but she continued. "I made mistakes in this process. I let fear and pride damage a friendship with someone who knew my son better than I did. But I'm asking this court not to let my failures prevent the Foundation from becoming what Ethan actually wanted it to be." The judge took a brief recess, then returned with his decision. "This court finds that while Mrs. Brooks's management of the Foundation has been unconventional, the evidence suggests she is actually attempting to align the Foundation more closely with Ethan Brooks' demonstrated values and actions. The petition for independent oversight is denied. However, this court recommends the Foundation establish a formal advisory board, including individuals who directly benefited from Ethan Brooks' assistance, to ensure future decisions reflect his actual legacy." Relief flooded through Madeline, but she barely heard the rest of the judge's comments. She was watching Xavier, who looked equally relieved and emotional. As the courtroom cleared, they found themselves face to face in the hallway. "I'm sorry," Madeline said before he could speak. "You were right. I was scared of being used, so I assumed the worst instead of trusting what we had built together. I was wrong." Xavier nodded slowly. "I should have been more upfront about the financial support. I didn't think it mattered. But I can see why it felt like a betrayal when you discovered it." "Can we start over?" Madeline asked. "Not as CEO and janitor, but as two people trying to honor someone we both loved. Xavier extended his hand. I'd like that. As they shook hands, Madeline felt something shift, not back to where they had been before the rupture, but forward into something more honest and resilient. They had broken trust and rebuilt it. That made their connection stronger, not weaker. The foundation would continue, but better now, informed by Ethan's real vision and guided by people who understood what he had actually tried to accomplish. It wasn't the legacy Madeline had originally imagined for her son, but it was the one he deserved. 14 months after the courtroom victory, Madeline stood in the lobby of the newly renovated Ethan Brooks Community Center, watching as Xavier cut the ribbon on what had once been an abandoned warehouse in the Bellevue district. The transformation was remarkable, not just of the building, but of everything the space represented. The center housed a commercial kitchen that provided job training, computer labs offering free technology education, meeting rooms for support groups, and a small medical clinic staffed by volunteer healthcare providers. But more importantly, it operated on principles Ethan had lived by. Help was available to anyone who needed it. No applications required, no proof of worthiness demanded, just human beings supporting other human beings through difficult times. Madeline had sold her Oakmont Heights estate 6 months ago, the sprawling mansion that had always felt too empty after Ethan died. She had moved into a more modest home in Ashland Hills, walking distance from the community center, and redirected the remaining funds into the foundation's endowment. Her penthouse office remained, but she spent less time there now, preferring to work from a small office at the center, where she could stay connected to the actual work being done. The foundation's board had been restructured exactly as the judge had suggested. Xavier served as director of outreach, overseeing programs and ensuring they remained true to Ethan's vision. Lily managed the recovery support services. Dylan coordinated veteran assistance programs. Kiana ran arts education initiatives. All 17 of the people Ethan had helped now played active roles in the foundation's work, transforming from recipients of charity into leaders of a movement. Thomas Chen had remained on the board, increasingly impressed by the foundation's impact despite his initial skepticism. Even some of the board members who had resigned had quietly returned, admitting they had been wrong to doubt Madeline's transformation. Harrison Caldwell, the attorney who had challenged her in court, had never apologized. But Madeline no longer cared about his opinion. She had learned to measure success differently now. The changes extended beyond organizational structure. Madeline had stepped back from her role as CEO of Brooks Technology Solutions, appointing a successor and moving into a chairman position that required far less day-to-day involvement. The decision had shocked the business community, with several financial publications running speculative pieces about her mental state and leadership capacity. She had ignored them all. Her relationship with Xavier had evolved into something she struggled to define for people who asked. They weren't quite friends in the casual sense. Their history was too complicated and painful for that easy label. But they had become something deeper. Partners in honoring Ethan's legacy. Confidants who understood each other's failures and growth. Two people bound by shared purpose and hard-won trust. They still met at Thornhill Park most mornings, both arriving around 6 to spend time at Ethan's bench before the day's work began. Xavier still brought flowers, and Madeline had started bringing coffee for both of them. They would sit in comfortable silence or discuss foundation matters, or sometimes just talk about their lives, the ordinary details that constituted genuine friendship. On this particular evening, after the ribbon-cutting ceremony and the speeches from community leaders and the tours given to local media, Madeline and Xavier found themselves alone in the center's main hall. The space was still filled with folding chairs from the ceremony, but everyone else had filtered out to the reception being held at the community kitchen next door. Ethan would have loved this. Xavier said quietly, looking around at what they had built together. He would have complained that we made it too formal. Madeline replied with a small smile. All the speeches and ribbon-cutting ceremony. He would have preferred we just opened the doors and started helping people without all the fanfare. True, Xavier agreed. But he also would have understood that sometimes ceremony matters. Sometimes people need to see that change is possible, that institutions can transform. This center proves that. Madeline nodded, feeling the weight of the past year settle over her. The journey from that first confrontation in the boardroom to this moment had been the most difficult period of her life, harder even than the immediate aftermath of Ethan's death. She had been forced to confront every assumption she held about success, worth, and human connection. She had failed repeatedly, hurt people she cared about, and struggled against every instinct that told her to retreat into the comfortable certainty of business logic. But she had also discovered capacities she didn't know she possessed. The ability to sit with someone's pain without trying to fix it immediately. The ability to value presence over productivity. The ability to measure impact not in quarterly reports, but in individual lives transformed. She had learned, slowly and imperfectly, to see people the way Ethan had. "Can I tell you something?" Madeline asked, breaking the comfortable silence. "Of course." "I used to think the worst tragedy of Ethan's death was that he never got to fulfill his potential, never got to build the companies or make the innovations I thought he was capable of. But I understand now that he had already fulfilled his potential. He was exactly who he was supposed to be, and I just couldn't see it because I was measuring him by the wrong standards." Xavier was quiet for a moment. "That's a hard realization to come to." "It is. But also freeing in a strange way. I don't have to wonder anymore what Ethan could have become. I just have to honor what he was." She gestured around the center. "This feels like the right way to do that." "He'd be proud of you," Xavier said. "Of how far you've come, how much you've changed." "I hope so. Though I think he'd also tell me I still have a long way to go." Madeline smiled ruefully. "I caught myself last week trying to create an efficiency matrix for the community kitchen's food distribution. Old habits die hard." Xavier laughed. "And Lily politely told you to back off?" "Not politely, but yes, she told me. I'm learning to take that feedback better than I used to." They stood together in the empty hall, surrounded by evidence of what two broken people could build when they learned to trust each other and honor a shared vision. The center would open officially next week, and Madeline knew there would be challenges ahead, funding issues and logistical problems, and the inevitable conflicts that arose in any organization. But she felt ready for those challenges in ways she never had before. "I should get to the reception," Xavier said finally. "Lily will kill me if I miss the toast she planned." "I'll come with you," Madeline replied. Then, on impulse, she added, "Thank you, Xavier, for not giving up on me when I gave you every reason to. For believing I could change, even when I didn't believe it myself." Xavier's expression softened. "Ethan believed people deserved second chances. I'm living proof of that. You deserved one too." They walked together toward the community kitchen, where laughter and conversation spilled out into the evening air. Through the windows, Madeline could see the 17 people who had testified on her behalf, plus dozens of others who had been helped by the Foundation's transformed programs. They were celebrating not just the new center, but the possibility of change, the reality that institutions and people could transform when they committed to seeing each other clearly. As Madeline entered the warm, crowded space, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years, a sense of belonging. Not the superficial belonging of professional networks and business relationships, but the deeper connection that came from shared purpose and genuine care. These people knew her failures and loved her anyway. They challenged her assumptions and forgave her mistakes. They had become, in the truest sense, family. Later that night, after the reception ended and everyone had gone home, Madeline drove to Thornhill Park one last time. She sat at Ethan's bench under the stars, tracing the brass plaque Xavier had installed. Ethan Brooks believed in second chances. "I got my second chance," she whispered into the darkness. "I got to understand who you really were, and I'm trying every day to honor that. I hope wherever you are, you can see what we've built. I hope you know that your life mattered, not because of what you could have accomplished, but because of who you were and how you loved people." A gentle breeze moved through the trees, carrying the scent of the flowers Xavier had left that morning. Madeline sat for a long time, feeling close to her son in ways she never had when he was alive. She had finally learned to see the world through his eyes, to value what he valued, to love the way he had loved. It was, she realized, the greatest gift he could have given her. Not success or achievement, but the ability to recognize what truly mattered. Connection, compassion, and the courage to help others even when the world said they weren't worth saving. Sometimes the families we build, the legacies we create, the lives we touch, those matter more than any empire or achievement. Ethan had understood that at 19. It had taken Madeline 51 years and her son's death to learn the same lesson. But she had learned it. And now, finally, she could live it. 3 years after the Ethan Brooks Community Center opened its doors, Madeline found herself doing something she never imagined possible. Teaching a class on business fundamentals to a group of people rebuilding their lives after incarceration, homelessness, and addiction. The classroom was modest, located on the second floor of the center, with whiteboards covering the walls and mismatched chairs arranged in a semicircle. Her students ranged in age from 22 to 67, each carrying stories of struggle and survival that humbled her every single week. This was her 4th semester teaching the course, and she had learned far more from her students than they would ever learn from her. "Okay, so let's talk about your business plans," Madeline said, settling into one of the chairs rather than standing at the front like a traditional teacher. Ethan had always believed in circles rather than hierarchies, and she had adopted that approach. "Anthony, you wanted to start a landscaping company. Walk us through your financial projections." Anthony White, a former construction worker who had lost everything to gambling addiction before finding recovery through the center's programs, stood nervously. He had been clean for 18 months now and possessed a work ethic that reminded Madeline of her younger self. His hands shook slightly as he presented his business plan, but his numbers were solid and his vision clear. After class ended, Xavier appeared in the doorway. He had just finished leading a literature discussion group in the room down the hall, another program inspired by his own journey from respected teacher to homeless addict to community leader. He had finally completed his teaching recertification 6 months ago, and now split his time between the center and substitute teaching at local schools, working toward a full-time position. "How did it go?" he asked as Madeline gathered her materials. "Anthony's ready," she said with satisfaction. "I think by next quarter he'll be able to launch his business. Ella from the women's shelter wants to partner with him, providing administrative support while he handles the field work." Xavier smiled. Ethan would love seeing people collaborate like that, building something together instead of competing. They walked through the center together, as had become their ritual after evening classes. The building was alive with activity, even at 7 in the evening. The community kitchen was preparing meals for tomorrow's breakfast service. The computer lab buzzed with students learning coding and digital literacy. Support groups met in various rooms, people helping each other through recovery, grief, job searches, and life transitions. The center now served over 300 people weekly, with programs constantly expanding based on community need rather than strategic planning. It was messy and inefficient by traditional nonprofit standards, but it worked because it was responsive and human-centered, exactly as Ethan had operated. I had lunch with Kiana today, Xavier mentioned as they paused by the wall of photographs documenting the center's history. She got accepted into Berklee College of Music with a full scholarship. She's heading to Boston in the fall. Madeline felt pride swell in her chest. Kiana had been performing at subway stations when Ethan found her 5 years ago. Now she was pursuing professional musical training at one of the world's premier institutions. That's wonderful. We should celebrate. She wants a small gathering, just the original 17 and close friends. She specifically asked for you to be there. The original 17, as they had come to be known, remained the heart of the Foundation's work. Some, like Lily and Dylan, worked full-time at the center. Others, like Kiana, had moved forward into independent successes but stayed connected to the community. They met monthly for dinners that were part support group, part family gathering, part strategic planning session. Madeline treasured those evenings more than any board meeting she had ever attended. Her phone buzzed with a message from Thomas Chen. Board meeting confirmed for next Tuesday. Foundation endowment now at $12 million. Interest alone funds 3 new programs annually. Madeline smiled. The foundation had grown substantially, not through her aggressive fundraising, but through word-of-mouth support from people who saw the real impact of the work. Small donors contributed regularly, and several major philanthropists had reached out after reading articles about the center's approach. Money still mattered, but it served the mission now rather than defining it. "I've been thinking about something," Xavier said as they reached the lobby. The evening receptionist, a young woman named Scylla, who had come through the center's job training program, waved at them as she answered phones. "Remember how Ethan used to just show up at the library, the soup kitchen, random places around the city? How he found people who needed help by being present in community spaces?" "Yes," Madeline replied, curious where this was leading. "I think we should formalize that somehow. Not make it a program exactly, but train volunteers in the art of just showing up and being present, paying attention to people who are invisible to everyone else." Madeline considered this. A year ago, her instinct would have been to create a structured outreach program with metrics and measurable outcomes. Now she understood what Xavier was actually suggesting, teaching people to see others the way Ethan had, without agenda or judgment. "I love that idea," she said. "It's perfect. We could call it the Presence Project or something like that." "Let's workshop the name," Xavier laughed. "But yes, something like that. I think it honors what Ethan did better than any formal program could." They parted ways in the parking lot, Xavier heading home to the small house he now owned in a neighborhood not far from where he had once been homeless, Madeline driving to her modest home in Ashland Hills. Her life looked nothing like it had 4 years ago, and she was profoundly grateful for that transformation. At home, she made tea and settled into her favorite chair, pulling out the letter Ethan had written her. She still read it regularly, finding new meaning in his words as she continued to grow and change. Tonight, one particular sentence stood out. "Don't help people because they deserve it or because they show promise. Help them because they need help. That's it." That's the whole criteria. So simple, so revolutionary, so completely contrary to everything she had believed before Xavier walked into that boardroom carrying a box of journals and the truth about her son. Madeline pulled out her own journal, a practice she had adopted over the past year. She wrote about Anthony's business plan, about Kiana's scholarship, about Xavier's idea for the Presence Project. She wrote about feeling more fulfilled now, living simply and serving others, than she ever had building her technology empire. She wrote about Ethan, about missing him every single day, but feeling closer to him now than when he was alive. About understanding that grief never really ended. It just transformed into something you carried differently, something that could fuel purpose rather than just pain. Her final entry for the night was a simple acknowledgement. I spent the first 51 years of my life measuring success by the wrong standards. Ethan tried to show me a better way, but I couldn't see it until Xavier forced me to look. Now I understand that the most important legacy isn't what we build or achieve, but who we help and how we love. Everything else is just noise. She closed the journal and sat in peaceful silence, grateful for second chances, for Xavier's patience, for the 17 people who had testified to Ethan's real legacy, for the opportunity to spend her remaining years honoring her son by becoming more like him. Sometimes the greatest transformations happen not when we finally achieve our goals, but when we learn to value completely different things. Madeline had built an empire, lost her son, and discovered that meaning was found not in boardrooms and profit margins, but in community spaces where broken people helped each other heal. It had taken her a lifetime to learn what Ethan understood at 19. But she had learned it. And every day, she lived it a little better. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.